A property line doesn't care how important you think you are. That was the first thought that crossed my mind at 5:17 on a Tuesday morning, when the hard metallic clang of a post driver snapped me awake. Clang, clang. Then came the low diesel rumble, steady enough to vibrate through the floorboards of my bedroom. I pulled on my jeans and work boots, stepped onto the porch, and smelled wet Texas grass, cold dirt, and exhaust hanging in the pre-dawn air. What I saw at the eastern pasture stopped me halfway down the steps. Nearly 200 feet of fence was already on the ground. Cedar posts my father had planted 27 years earlier lay stacked beside an excavator, and a line of bright orange survey stakes cut through my pasture like somebody had drawn across the ranch with a ruler. 3 workers stood beside the equipment, and behind them, parked on the gravel shoulder, was a spotless white Lexus. Diane Holloway leaned against the hood with a coffee cup in one hand and a rolled site plan in the other. President of the Redwood Hills HOA. 51 years old. Perfect hair. Dark sunglasses before sunrise. She looked more prepared for a closing appointment than for explaining why heavy equipment was sitting inside Mercer Ranch. I walked toward her slowly. Gravel cracked beneath my boots. One worker killed the post driver, and the sudden silence made the morning feel even colder. "You're on my land," I said. Diane smiled. I knew that smile. It was the same one she'd worn while sending me notices about my tractor, my hay bales, and a fence color her HOA had absolutely no authority to regulate. "Actually, Caleb," she said, spreading the site plan across her hood. "That's what we're correcting." Her perfume mixed strangely with diesel fumes as she pointed at a pale blue section on the map. 18 acres. My eastern pasture. Updated records show this parcel falls within Redwood Hills development boundary. You've effectively been occupying association property. For a moment, I said nothing. A meadowlark called from somewhere beyond the barn. Diane tapped the map again. "Our attorney will send you a boundary agreement today. Sign it, and we can avoid making this unnecessarily expensive." I looked at the fallen fence, then the orange stakes. Then something behind Diane caught my attention. A quarter-mile away stood the limestone entrance to Redwood Hills Estates, the only paved road connecting more than 100 homes to the county highway. I stared at the curve where that pavement crossed the old ranch line, and a memory came back so clearly I could almost smell my father's black coffee. I was 12, kneeling beside him while he brushed dirt from a brass survey marker. "Never move these, Caleb. Fences rot. Paper gets copied wrong. Markers don't lie." My eyes shifted toward our barn. Above the workbench, beneath 20 years of dust, was my grandfather's steel document tube. Diane mistook my silence for surrender. "I'm glad you're being reasonable," she said, rolling up her map. I looked once more at the Redwood Hills entrance and noticed exactly where the pavement bent around an old drainage ditch. Something about that bend didn't match Diane's map. Not even close. She thought she'd arrived that morning to claim 18 acres of my ranch. She had no idea she'd just given me a reason to check who actually owned the ground beneath the road she had driven in on. The first thing my father ever taught me about land was simple. Never trust a fence more than the ground beneath it. Tom Mercer had a way of turning ordinary ranch work into lessons I would not understand until years later. Mercer Ranch had been in our family since 1968, when my grandfather Henry bought 84 acres of stubborn Texas pasture with money he had saved working construction. Over the next decade, he added another 42 acres, piece by piece, until the ranch reached 126 acres of rolling grass, mesquite, shallow creek beds, and red dirt that stuck to your boots after rain. I grew up there. Summer mornings smelled like hot cedar, cattle feed, and motor oil from the old tractor. Winter meant breaking thin sheets of ice from water troughs while Dad stood nearby with black coffee steaming from a dented metal thermos. By 12, I knew how to reset a fence post. By 16, I could operate most of our equipment. Later, I spent years working land survey and earthwork jobs around the county, learning how roads, drainage, easements, and property descriptions fit together. Dad loved that. He said knowing the land was more useful than knowing what somebody wanted the land to be worth. But there was one rule he repeated more than any other. Never disturb the brass markers. They were small survey monuments set low enough that tall grass could hide them completely. Once, when I was 12, I almost covered one while helping Dad repair the eastern fence. He stopped me, crouched in the dirt, and cleaned the brass disc with his thumb. Remember this, Caleb. Fences rot. Maps get copied wrong. People forget. Markers do not lie. Then he took me into the barn and pointed above his workbench. A steel document tube rested on two wooden brackets beneath a layer of dust. Inside, he explained, were the original deeds, surveys, field notes, and legal descriptions going back to Grandpa Henry. I remember asking why we needed all that paper when everybody already knew where Mercer Ranch was. Dad gave me that patient look fathers save for questions their sons will eventually answer themselves. Because knowing where your ranch is and proving where your ranch is are two different things. After he died, I left the tube exactly where he had kept it. I maintained the fences, paid the taxes, worked the pasture, and never had a reason to open it. Nobody questioned our boundaries. Not until Redwood Hills appeared beyond the eastern line. That land had once been open pasture. Then came graders, concrete trucks, limestone entrance columns, matching rooftops, landscaped medians, and eventually Diane Holloway. By the time she drove away that Tuesday morning, her white Lexus disappearing through those limestone columns, the workers had stopped driving stakes, but had left nearly 200 feet of my fence on the ground. Wind whispered through the opening where cedar posts had stood since my childhood. I walked back toward the barn, my boots brushing damp grass. Inside, everything still smelled like old leather, machine oil, and dry hay. Dad's workbench sat exactly where he had left it. I reached above it and ran my fingers across cold steel beneath a thick layer of dust. Then I lifted the document tube from its brackets. For the first time in years, I heard my father's words exactly as he had spoken them. Knowing was one thing. Proving it was another. Diane Holloway had been testing my boundaries long before she ever tried to redraw them. The first letter showed up about 9 months after Redwood Hills finished its final row of houses along my eastern pasture. Heavy cream paper. Dark green logo. Official-looking envelope. According to Diane, my John Deere tractor was visible from the subdivision entrance and violated community appearance standards. I read the notice twice at my kitchen table while coffee cooled beside my elbow. Then I checked the parcel number printed at the top. Mine. That was almost funny. I mailed it back with a county map and a simple reminder that Mercer Ranch was not part of Redwood Hills. 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived. Hay bales visible from residential property. Then livestock odor. Then inappropriate fencing materials. One notice complained about a galvanized water tank reflecting afternoon sunlight toward 3 houses on Juniper Lane. That was when Diane finally drove onto my ranch herself. Her white Lexus rolled over the gravel at 10 miles per hour, tires crunching softly beneath the cottonwood trees. She stepped out wearing polished loafers, pressed slacks, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my best pair of work boots. Her perfume reached me over the smell of cut hay. "We are simply protecting community standards," she said, holding a leather folder against her chest. I wiped grease from my hands with a shop rag. "Your community ends at that fence." Diane glanced toward the eastern boundary. "Your property still affects our residents. Your developer built houses beside a working ranch." Her smile stayed in place, but her fingers tightened around the folder. From then on, the letters came almost monthly. I kept every one. Tractor placement, fence color, equipment visibility, dust from the ranch road. None of it had authority behind it, but Diane wrote each notice as if she were issuing orders. From the courthouse, I answered politely and attached the same parcel records every time. She never acknowledged them. Instead, she started appearing near the eastern fence with contractors, engineers, and men carrying measuring equipment. One afternoon, I found her standing beside 2 surveyors while they studied my pasture. Orange flags fluttered near their boots. "Planning something?" I asked. Diane turned with that practice smile. "Reviewing future infrastructure needs. On your side of the fence, I hope." She looked across my grass toward the creek. "Growing communities require flexibility, Caleb. Boundaries sometimes become more practical over time." I remember the wind pushing dry grass against my jeans while I stared at her. Property lines did not become practical. They became inconvenient to people who wanted what was beyond them. A month later, Redwood Hills upgraded its entrance. Fresh black asphalt, decorative lighting, irrigation lines, 2 massive limestone columns with Redwood Hills Estates spelled across black iron between them. Diane called it the permanent gateway in the neighborhood newsletter. I watched crews finish the curved approach from my pickup one evening, and something about that curve bothered me. It seemed too far west, closer to the old ranch line than I remembered, but I had cattle to move before dark and gave it no more thought. Then, 6 weeks before the excavator woke me, Diane sent a certified envelope thicker than all the others. Inside was a professionally printed development map. 18 acres of my eastern pasture had been shaded pale blue. New streets crossed it. 12 future home sites sat where my cattle grazed. At the top, in clean black letters, were the words Proposed Community Expansion Area. I stood at the kitchen counter listening to the refrigerator hum while the meaning settled in. The tractor notices had never been about appearance. The fence complaints had never been about standards. Diane had spent months testing whether I would accept her authority 1 inch at a time. Now she was ready to find out what happened when she asked for 18 acres. The certified envelope arrived 3 days after Diane showed me that expansion map, thick enough to feel expensive in my hand. I opened it at the kitchen counter while the coffee maker hissed behind me. 6 pages slid out, followed by a glossy plat stamped with the Redwood Hills logo. Richard Sloan, the association attorney, claimed an old development easement gave Redwood Hills control over the 18-acre strip along my eastern pasture. The letter gave me 30 days to acknowledge their boundary or face legal action. I read it twice. Then I spread their plat beside my county tax map. Diane's line ran west through land my family had fenced, taxed, and worked for decades. Worse, the proposed expansion was no longer just colored shading. 12 home sites had numbers now. A walking trail curved beside the creek. A landscape park sat where Dad used to stack winter hay. They were designing a neighborhood on my ranch before I had agreed to surrender a single foot. The next morning, I drove 15 miles into town and walked into the county records office carrying both maps under my arm. The room smelled like paper, carpet cleaner, and burnt coffee. Laura Bennett, the clerk behind the counter, searched my parcel number and pulled up scanned records dating back decades. The older documents looked familiar. The newer ones did not. One digitized plat showed a reference line reaching farther west than the tax map. Another used vague language about future access and development rights. Laura leaned toward the monitor and frowned. I would not sign anything until a licensed surveyor looks at this. I thanked her and drove home with less certainty than I had arrived with. Diane understood exactly how useful uncertainty could be. Orange flags appeared deeper in my pasture that afternoon. 2 days later, wooden stakes marked what looked like future lot corners. I photographed every one. On Saturday, 3 vehicles stopped beside my fence. A real estate agent stepped out with 2 couples and pointed across my grass while describing future homes with ranch views. "Can I help you?" I asked. The agent lowered her brochure. "We were told this is the next phase of Redwood Hills." I looked at the cattle grazing behind her proposed building sites. Nobody told me. Monday morning, Diane returned. Her white Lexus idled beside my gate while condensation dripped beneath it onto the gravel. She handed me another letter from Richard Sloan. "The board would prefer to settle this without unnecessary expense," she said. "There is nothing to settle. The records disagree. Some records do." Her expression barely changed. "Then perhaps you should consider how much proving your interpretation will cost." There it was. Not ownership. Pressure. Make the rancher spend enough money and eventually the rancher sells. Diane climbed back into her Lexus and drove toward Redwood Hills. I watched her pass between the limestone columns, follow the curved entrance, and disappear behind the landscaped median. That curve bothered me again. I could not explain why. Near sunset, I took an old measuring wheel from the barn and walked the eastern boundary. Dry grass whispered against my jeans. I measured from the fence toward the county road, comparing distances with the newer plat. Something was wrong. The numbers pushed my line west, but the physical landmarks I remembered sat farther east. By the time darkness settled over the pasture, I had more questions than answers. I returned to the barn, switched on the yellow bulb above Dad's workbench, and lifted the steel document tube from where I had left it. Dust streaked my palms. The cap resisted at first, then turned with a dry metallic scrape. Diane had paperwork. Now I was going to see what my family had kept. The cap loosened with a dry metallic scrape, and the smell of old paper and machine oil drifted up from the steel tube. I carried everything to Dad's workbench and spread the documents beneath the yellow shop light. Deeds, tax receipts, survey plats, field notes written in pencil. Some pages were older than I was. their folds soft from decades of being opened and closed. I expected one document to settle everything. Instead, I found 3 versions of the same boundary, and only one of them matched what I remembered on the ground. Grandpa Henry's original survey described the eastern line using bearings, distances, and permanent brass monuments. Dad had penciled small notes beside several measurements. I placed Diane's glossy development plat next to it. Her map pushed the boundary west. Grandpa's did not. I checked the numbers twice, then pulled an old calculator from Dad's drawer and checked them again. The difference was too large to dismiss as a copying error. Still, I knew better than to confuse suspicion with proof. The next morning, I called Mason Reed, a licensed surveyor I had worked with years earlier on grading and drainage projects. Mason listened without interrupting while I explained the 18 acres, the conflicting records, and the orange stakes. "Do not touch their markers," he said. "Photograph everything exactly where it sits." That was all I needed to hear. I spent the afternoon walking the eastern pasture with my phone. Every orange flag, every wooden stake, every old fence corner, every brass monument I could find beneath the grass. The sun baked the back of my neck while cicadas buzzed from the mesquite. Around 4 o'clock, another email arrived from Richard Sloan. Redwood Hills wanted the boundary agreement signed by Friday. Refusal, he wrote, could expose me to additional legal costs. I read that sentence twice. Diane's strategy finally made sense. She did not need to prove she owned my land immediately. She only needed to make defending it expensive enough that selling 18 acres felt easier than fighting. Friday morning, Mason arrived with his equipment. We started near the old eastern corner. His receiver chirped softly while he worked from monument to monument. The first brass marker sat east of Diane's claimed line. So did the second. Then the third. Mason said almost nothing. After 3 hours, we reached the section nearest the county road. He studied his screen, looked toward the limestone entrance of Redwood Hills, then back at me. "Did your grandfather own a separate access tract out here?" I remembered seeing something in the tube. "I think so." "Find it." That evening, I searched every folded page again. Near the bottom was a narrow document with 4 words written across the top in Grandpa Henry's handwriting. East Access Tract Survey. I unfolded it carefully and followed the legal description with my finger. The parcel extended from the ranch toward the county road. Then it turned. I stopped. Read the bearing again. Check the distance. Then I walked outside carrying the paper. Night had settled over the pasture, and headlights moved beyond the fence as Redwood Hills residents returned home. Every pair followed the same curved entrance beneath those limestone columns. I looked down at Grandpa's survey, then back at the road. The numbers were pointing straight toward that curve. I still needed certified records and Mason's final measurements before I could prove anything. But for the first time since Diane's stakes appeared in my pasture, I was not thinking about the 18 acres she wanted. I was thinking about the strip of ground her entire neighborhood used every single day. By 7 the next morning, Mason Reed was standing beside my truck with Grandpa Henry's East Access Tract Survey spread across the hood. The paper fluttered in the warm Texas breeze while he traced the old bearings with one finger. "If these monuments are still where this says they are, Caleb, your problem may be bigger than 18 acres. I looked toward Redwood Hills. Bigger for who? Mason folded the survey. That is what we are going to find out. We started near the eastern pasture and worked toward the county road. His equipment chirped softly as we crossed dry grass and followed measurements recorded decades earlier. The first brass monument was buried beneath 3 inches of packed dirt beside an old drainage swale. I brushed away the soil with my glove. The stamped number matched Grandpa's field notes. The second marker sat near the remains of a cedar stump. Another match. Mason entered both positions without saying much. That was his way. Facts first. Opinions later. By mid-morning, we reached the landscaped edge of Redwood Hills. Sprinklers hissed across trimmed grass. Cars rolled through the limestone entrance every few seconds, tires humming against smooth asphalt. Mason walked slowly beside the curb, watching his receiver. Then the chirping accelerated. He stopped. Right here, beneath decorative gravel near the curve was another tarnished brass disc. I crouched and cleaned it with my thumb. Same survey series. Same old markings. For a moment, Dad's voice came back, so clearly it felt like he was standing beside me. "Markers do not lie." Mason looked from the monument to the entrance road. Do not celebrate yet. I need the recorded deeds and every easement attached to this tract. That afternoon, I went straight to Laura Bennett at the county records office. She searched the older index books, the ones that smelled like dust and aging cardboard and had never been completely transferred into the digital system. 40 minutes later, she found a recorded instrument from 1981 connected to Grandpa Henry's access parcel. I read the critical language slowly. The neighboring property had been granted limited roadway access across a defined portion of the tract. Access, not ownership. The distinction was small enough to fit inside one sentence and large enough to change everything. I ordered certified copies and drove home without calling Diane. That part mattered. She expected me to argue. Instead, I stopped arguing completely. The following morning, her white Lexus rolled up beside my gate. Diane stepped out holding another leather folder. Richard still has not received your signed boundary agreement. I know. She waited. Are you refusing? I am reviewing the records. Her mouth curled into that familiar confident smile. We have already reviewed them. Behind her, cars flowed through the Redwood Hills entrance. Every single one crossed the curve Mason had measured the day before. Then you have nothing to worry about, I said. Diane studied me for a second, apparently deciding I had finally realized how expensive resistance could become. I am glad you are being practical. She climbed back into her Lexus and drove away. I watched her pass between the limestone columns and follow the curve toward the subdivision. Then I photographed the orange stakes still planted across my pasture and saved the image with the date and time. After that, I photographed the damaged fence, copied every email, organized every certified letter, and backed everything up. I was not going to remove a stake or block a road. I wanted the record untouched. Because Diane thought my silence meant she was winning. What she did not understand was that I had stopped trying to change her mind. I was giving her room to put every mistake in writing. For the next 6 days, I let Diane believe silence meant surrender. I did not answer her calls. I did not argue with her attorney. I did not touch the orange stakes scattered across my pasture, even when another crew added 3 more near the creek. Every morning, I walked the eastern line with my phone and photographed exactly what had changed. Stakes, tire tracks, survey flags, fence sections, dates and times went into a folder on my computer before breakfast. Mason came back twice with his survey equipment, following Grandpa Henry's bearings from one brass monument to the next. His receiver chirped through the dry Texas heat while I carried copies of the old field notes beside him. On Wednesday afternoon, he called from his truck. I have enough to confirm the eastern line. I stopped tightening a bolt on the tractor. And the 18 acres are inside Mercer Ranch. No question. I looked toward the pasture and felt something inside me settle. What about the access tract? Mason paused. I am still checking the recorded instruments. Do not say anything to Diane yet. I had no intention of doing that. Diane was doing more for my case every day than I ever could. Richard Sloan sent another letter calling Redwood Hills the lawful controlling party over the disputed acreage. The board emailed residents saying the expansion was proceeding after resolution of what Diane called a historic boundary irregularity. I printed everything. Then Diane made it even better. She sent contractors back to photograph future building sites. I stood 50 yards away and quietly photographed them, documenting land they did not own. By Friday evening, my kitchen table had disappeared beneath paperwork. Certified deeds, tax records, photographs, emails, old surveys, new measurements. I arranged everything by date and scanned duplicate copies. Dad used to say that people remembered arguments differently, but paper remembered exactly what somebody signed. Laura Bennett called shortly before noon the next day. She had located an older recorded instrument from before Redwood Hills existed. The original neighboring parcel had received a defined roadway easement across part of Grandpa Henry's east access tract. I asked the question carefully. Did ownership transfer with it? I heard pages moving on her end. Not according to this document. I thanked her and ordered a certified copy. Mason arrived that evening carrying a cardboard plan tube. We spread his completed survey across my kitchen table and held the corners down with coffee mugs. First, he showed me the eastern boundary. Diane's proposed 18-acre expansion sat entirely inside Mercer Ranch. Then his finger moved toward the highway. A narrow parcel followed the old legal description, crossed the landscaped edge of Redwood Hills, and continued beneath part of the curved entrance road. Their recorded easement gives them roadway access here, Mason said, tapping the paper. But this survey and the deed chain indicate the underlying tract remained with your family's parcel. Outside my kitchen window, headlights moved through the subdivision entrance in a steady stream. I thought about Diane's white Lexus crossing that same ground every time she came to explain property rights to me. Monday morning, Richard Sloan emailed requesting a formal meeting with Diane, the board, their developer, Mason, and county representatives. They wanted me to sign the boundary agreement so construction could proceed. I replied that I would attend. Then I walked into the barn and picked up Grandpa's steel document tube. This time, I did not return it to the dusty brackets above Dad's workbench. I set it beside the door. Diane had spent months putting her confidence in writing. Now she had invited everyone into one room to watch me put the actual boundary on the table. The Redwood Hills clubhouse had never felt quieter. 9 people sat around the long conference table, and the only sound for several seconds was the low hum of the air conditioner above us. Diane Holloway sat at the head with Richard Sloan beside her, both surrounded by neat folders and printed copies of the expansion plat. Mason Reed took the chair next to me. Laura Bennett had brought certified county records, and across from us sat 2 board members, the developer's project manager and a county planning representative. Diane opened the meeting with the confidence of someone expecting a signature, not an argument. We appreciate Caleb coming in so we can finally resolve this boundary issue. Richard took over. He walked everyone through their newer plat, pointed to the 18 acres shaded blue, and repeated the claim that Redwood Hills possessed development rights over that section of Mercer Ranch. I said nothing. Diane talked about community growth, responsible planning, and unnecessary delays. Then Richard slid the boundary agreement toward me. Once this is executed, the matter is settled. I looked at the signature line. Then I reached down and placed Grandpa Henry's steel document tube on the table. The metal made a dull sound against the polished wood. Diane glanced at it. What is that? The reason I did not sign. I twisted the cap open. That familiar dry scrape cut through the room. Mason unfolded Grandpa's original survey first. Then he placed his newly certified survey directly beside it. He explained each recovered brass monument, each verified bearing, and each measured distance. No speeches, just numbers. His finger traveled along the eastern boundary until it surrounded the 18 acres Diane wanted. Every surviving monument agrees with the original deed description, Mason said. This acreage falls within the Mercer parcel. Richard leaned forward. That contradicts our development plat. Yes, Mason said calmly. Your plat appears to have mistaken a reference line for a property boundary. Laura opened her certified records. The recorded deed chain supports Mr. Reed's survey. Diane's fingers tightened around her pen. There must be another filing. Laura shook her head. Not one conveying those 18 acres. I could smell Diane's coffee cooling across the table. Her confidence had not vanished yet, but it had cracked. That was when I pulled out the East Access Tract survey. There is one more boundary. Mason rotated his map toward the board. His finger followed the narrow Mercer parcel toward the county highway. Everyone watched it pass beneath the landscaped edge of Redwood Hills and stop under the curved entrance road. The developer's project manager leaned over the table. Wait, that is our main entrance. Part of it crosses this tract, Mason said. Richard immediately reached for Laura's 1981 record. There is an easement. Correct, Laura said. A defined roadway easement. Diane exhaled and leaned back. Then Redwood Hills controls the road. I finally looked directly at her. Access is not ownership. Laura confirmed it. The neighboring property had received the right to use a defined portion for roadway access, but the underlying title had remained in the Mercer chain. Nobody moved. Outside the clubhouse windows, I could hear tires rolling over pavement as residents entered and left the neighborhood. Diane stared down at the survey, following the line with her eyes until it reached those limestone columns she drove through every morning. For months, she had insisted I did not understand my own boundary. Now the certified records showed that the 18 acres were mine, and part of the ground beneath Redwood Hills entrance was mine too. I slid her and signed agreement back across the table. You wanted the property lines verified, I said. Now they are. For the first time in months, my mailbox stayed empty. No cream-colored envelopes. No deadlines from Richard Sloan. No notices telling me what Diane Holloway believed she controlled. 3 days after the meeting, Richard contacted me with something different. Redwood Hills was formally withdrawing its claim to the 18 acres. The expansion plan was suspended, and the association agreed to remove every marker its contractors had placed on Mercer Ranch. The following Tuesday, I stood beside the eastern pasture while a crew collected the orange stakes one by one. The morning smelled like damp cedar and fresh grass. Each stake came out with a soft pull from the soil, leaving small holes where Diane's future streets and home sites had existed only on paper. By afternoon, the pasture looked like pasture again. The settlement required Redwood Hills to restore the fence and cover the surveying and documented property restoration costs their actions had created. I asked for nothing more. I did not want revenge on the families living behind those limestone columns. They had bought homes, paid their dues, and trusted their board to understand the land beneath their community. The entrance issue was handled just as carefully. The existing roadway easement remained in place, so residents kept using the same entrance without interruption. New documents were recorded acknowledging that the underlying east access tract remained in the Mercer property chain while preserving the lawful access rights already granted decades earlier. Nobody lost a road. Nobody lost a home. The only thing Redwood Hills lost was the fiction that access meant ownership. Diane lost something else. Once homeowners learned how much money had been spent on lawyers, survey work, and expansion planning before anyone verified the original boundary, questions started filling the next board meeting. Why had contractors entered my pasture before an agreement existed? Why had residents been told the boundary dispute was already resolved? Why had Diane pushed an expansion based on a plat that confused a reference line with a property line? Mason called me afterward. "She is not president anymore," he said. I looked across the pasture. Was it close? Not even a little. I never went to that meeting. I had work to do. That Saturday, I repaired Dad's old steel gate. The hinge groaned when I lifted it, and the familiar smell of machine oil clung to my gloves. Later, I walked the restored eastern fence as the evening sun turned the grass copper. Near the county road, I stopped at the brass monument Mason had uncovered. I knelt and brushed dust from its surface with my thumb, exactly the way Dad had done when I was 12. Beyond it, cars moved peacefully through the Redwood Hills entrance. Tires whispered across the curved pavement. Families came home carrying groceries. Children rode bicycles near the landscaped median. Nothing had been blocked. Nothing needed to be. Everyone simply knew where. The line was now. Back in the barn, I rolled Grandpa Henry's surveys carefully, slid them into the steel tube, and returned it to the brackets above Dad's workbench. For years, I had thought those papers were just family history. Now I understood why he kept them. Diane had spent months trying to move a boundary with confidence, pressure, and paperwork. My family had done something quieter. We had kept the original deed, protected the markers, and remembered where our land ended. Justice did not need to make much noise. Sometimes it was nothing more than an old brass marker waiting patiently beneath the dirt. Thank you for watching this story. If Caleb Mercer's patience, respect for his family's legacy, and determination to trust the original deeds and survey markers instead of intimidation inspired you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends who enjoy compelling HOA dramas and stories where facts and careful preparation defeat abuse of authority, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable HOA conflicts, property rights battles, and real-life justice stories. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story about disputed boundaries, forgotten records, and ordinary landowners who quietly stand their ground when someone else believes confidence and paperwork can change who truly owns the land. Your support helps us continue bringing these remarkable stories to life, and we cannot wait to share the next one with you. That if you were in Caleb Mercer's position, would you have used the discovery about the land beneath Redwood Hills entrance to pressure the HOA after they tried to claim 18 acres of your ranch? Or would you have done what Caleb did? Protect your property while allowing the families in the neighborhood to keep their lawful access? Tell us your choice in the comments and explain why.